Yes, Bank of England is flying blind, which feels a little bit worrying, but it's thought that the bank may actually raise interest rates by less than previously considered because the situation isn't looking quite as grave as it was a couple of weeks ago. Gas prices are falling, which is very good for inflation, and the markets have been calmed a little bit from that jittery state they were in by the arrival of Rishi Sunak, who's widely viewed as a safe pair of hands. That said, the situation still is pretty grave, and although 50 billion should perhaps be taken with a bit of a pinch of salt because the Chancellor is in expectation management mode and is hoping that by the time the budget gets there we'll all be expecting much worse than it is, but there are going to be swathes of both tax rises and public sector cuts. The Chancellor and the Prime Minister have a few options. None of them are politically easy at all, but some are slightly easier than others. There's the option to raise taxes, but obviously we know that the tax burden is already at a record high. So the only taxes that could be raised really are corporation tax, which people don't feel affects the individual too much because the focus is on business. And there are the stealth taxes, as they're called, by freezing the threshold that people pay a higher rate of income tax. With a backdrop of high inflation, that works out as a tax rise in itself. They could also cut public investment, but that is not really conducive to the pro-growth and levelling up plan. So it's quite difficult to see how they could, for example, cut nuclear investment or cut one of those infrastructure projects like HS2. It would bring in some money, but it doesn't fit with the political agenda of the Conservative Party and would break manifesto promises. Then perhaps politically the most difficult option would be to cut day-to-day public sector spending. You've got the option of cutting across the big departments, across defence, education, health, etc. But it's very hard to see how Conservative MPs with their angry constituents at home could vote to see the price per pupil spend in their local school go down. So that's quite tricky. The low-hanging fruit is perhaps public sector pay. They're talking about perhaps a 2% rise rather than what the unions are demanding, which is 10%. But obviously there are a lot of constituents who work in the public sector and probably wouldn't be too happy about that. So it's a very difficult situation the Chancellor and Prime Minister have ahead.
Yeah, do we know what the thinking is on the windfall tax at the moment? I mean, clearly there is a windfall tax in place, but we're looking at BP's figures, 7.1 billion, doubling over the past 3 months. I mean, could that be extended further, given what Shell and BP have been reporting?
Yes, it sounds as though it is going to be extended up to 30% and into 2028, which is pretty big. And I think it's quite interesting that the Telegraph is reporting that the Prime Minister is talking about those with the broadest shoulders should bear the biggest burden. And I think we can safely read that as the broadest shoulders being these big energy companies like Shell. But a windfall tax, by its very nature, obviously, is temporary. And it's hard to see how they could extend it beyond 2028 without risking these big companies just refusing to invest in Britain far into the future.